Well, happy Wednesday, or Thursday, I guess it is. My name is Tamala Olsby, and I am from the Texas Education Agency, and I am very, very, very pleased that you have chosen to join us today. We are going to be discussing, of course, classroom environments in the pre-kindergarten program. And our focus today will be on class schedules and displays that are within the classroom. Again, I'm very, very, very glad that you are here. Please note that there is a handout in the control panel, and you can download that. They are the PowerPoint slides. And if you have something to say during the session here, don't hesitate to type in your question or statement or whatever in the questions box in the control panel. And then lastly, I think anyway, remember that this webinar will be recorded and made available for those that couldn't be here today. So let's get started. So today's agenda, we're going to start by reviewing a little bit of the last unit, Unit 5, when we talked about the teacher's role in the classroom environment. And then we're going to hit Unit 6. We're going to go over class schedules, how to create them, and also what are some best practices regarding classroom displays. I'll introduce an activity that I want you to participate in over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll talk about our next steps. And as always, we close with resources and support. So hopefully by the end of today, you will be able to either review or create a pre-kindergarten daily class schedule that is not only age appropriate, but it also maximizes the learning that could be made available to each young student. I'm also hoping that at the end of the webinar, you can articulate how classroom transitions and regular routines can be used effectively as education opportunities. And then lastly, be able to discuss best practices associated with the effective use of classroom displays. So large agenda, big goals today. So let's review Unit 5 briefly first. Remember, we talked about what is the teacher's role in the classroom environment. And obviously, one of the biggest roles that the teacher has is just to set up the environment. And we talked about how this is not a one-time event. It's not set up your classroom in August before school starts and then it's done for the year. But in pre-kindergarten, it is ongoing. And one of the main reasons why is because we want the classroom environment aligning with whatever the learning objectives that the students are learning. So we talked about, can you walk into one of your pre-K classes and without even hearing a child or hearing the teacher, can you tell what the children are learning about just by looking at the environment? You should be able to. We also talked about the role of the teacher in just general supervision. Obviously, the health and safety and pure supervision of the child and the student is very important with these young students. And then we talked about how the environment could be used to expand learning, not only in teacher-directed ways, but in child-initiated ways. And then we went to this quote from a really good book, and we talked about what does the teacher do when all the students are in the learning centers. And so this quote made us think about the teacher moving around the room, checking in with the children, offering support, instruction as appropriate, and that there should be a very constant exchange of thoughts and ideas between the teacher and the student. If you'll remember, we watched a webinar called Serve and Return, and it described the effectiveness of when teachers respond to student questions or inquiries, and then they wait for the child to ask again, and then they keep going back and forth. So the conversation is really ongoing. This quote here also talked about what do you do when there's more than one person in the room. And it talked about that sometimes an adult can be stationed in a particular center or in a group of centers while the other adult is doing some one-on-one instruction or small group instruction. And after I individually talked with a lot of you, I found out that that's quite a common practice among the 17 of you, that many of you use the Learning Center time to also do your small group instruction. So that was an interesting thing for me. So we're going to delve now. We're just going to go right into it because I have a lot to share today. So let's get into class schedules. So here are some general guidelines that we're going to go through very quickly here, and then I'm going to go through each of them in a little more detail. This is, generally speaking, what makes a good class schedule. It needs to be consistent and yet flexible. It needs to be quiet, but also active. There needs to be time for whole group, small group, and even perhaps individual instruction. Some parts of the day are very teacher directed and other parts of the day are child initiated. The transitions should be minimized as often as can happen. And the routine parts of the day, we're going to do some talking about that because I'd like to perhaps give you another perspective on those. So we're going to now go over these in a little more detail. So when we're talking about consistency versus flexibility, I think we need to remember how young these students are. You know, they're 3 or 4, just turning 5. And really, they thrive on repetition and routine. They like predictability. Predictability gives them security. And so having the schedule remain the same during the day is very helpful for them. But we all know that sometimes stuff happens and it's very, very hard to keep a perfectly consistent schedule. So that really shouldn't even be an objective. There are always going to be spontaneous or even unexpected learning opportunities. And, you know, those teachable moments, you don't want to ignore those. Those unexpected learning opportunities, we want teachers to be taking advantage of. So there is a general guidance here that although the class schedule should be consistent, it should also be flexible. And that makes it even harder, I understand. There should also be balance in the school day. So the amount of quiet needs to be a little bit equal to the amount of active. So you might do a quiet thing first, and then you want to do an active thing, and then you can probably go back to quiet again. Even multiple ways to learn. There should be some whole group times during the day. There should be parts of the day that you're taking a small group of students and instructing them. And there could even be individual instruction. And that might be best seen in the learning centers. And then, as I said earlier, there should be a balance between times of the day when the teacher has full control over everything that's being done, teacher directed. And then there should be parts of the day where the child has choices in what activity they are doing. You'll notice I put a picture of a balance scale here, mainly because that's huge when you're looking at a total daily classroom schedule for pre-kindergarten. What you want to look for is that there is balance there. And teachers that are off balance in any one of these areas might need to be given even clearer guidelines. I remember once having a teacher that really tended to want the quiet whole group. I'm in charge of all the activity. And I ended up giving her times. So if you're going to do this activity for this long, then you need to choose another activity that's very active and the child has choices for this long. And sometimes teachers need a little more guidance than just telling them you need to have quiet and active, you need to have teacher directed and child initiated. Sometimes they need that spelled out. And so you might think about that if you find that your teachers are a little, what I would call off balance when talking about the school day. Transitions are a huge thing in a schedule. And I wanted to make sure that we are all using the same definition. So the definition that I am using is the transitions are the process or the period of change between one state or condition to another. So it is the difference between all the children are sitting at group time and then you are dismissing them to learning center time. Or they are in learning center time and you now need them to go to cleanup time. The best practice here is to minimize those. So do as few of them as you can during the day. What we tend to find is that children, there are a ton more challenging behaviors at transition times, especially if the transitions are not done really, really well. And so we want to talk about that a little bit. How can you use a transition not as just in between time, but as a real learning opportunity? You might even, through this, want to think about when you're looking at your daily class schedules in your pre-kindergarten program, you might want to write out how many transitions are there and how many of those transitions does a teacher do something with it? Either sing a song, do a finger play, ask questions, whatever, play a game, something. So that those transitions are not downtime at all. They are actually more practice learning times. And so anyway, I want to give you a couple of examples of transitions. And unfortunately, you're going to hear me sing. So I'm going to apologize up front. But here's a good one, I think, anyway. So let's say all the kids are lined up. You have it's the end of the day and you're lining some of the children up because they go home on a bus. And the bus isn't here. It's a couple minutes late. And so you're in a line and you're trying to keep them occupied. Well, you might want to sing, If your clothes have any red, if your clothes have any red, if your clothes have any red, put your finger on your head. If your clothes have any red, So see, in a simple itty bitty song like that, the children are still engaged and they could be learning. And so that is a very appropriate use of a transition time. You might have the kids, even in the same example, the kids are waiting for the bus. So you're trying to teach them to count to wherever, 20 in both languages, English and Spanish. So you let one child say any of the number words in Spanish. The example I gave you here was uno, and all the other children have to say what is the English equivalent. So they would all go, 1, and maybe the next student would say tres, and then all the other students would say 3. So there's a million of these that you could do. When you're lining up to go to the playground, you can pretend you're walking on clouds, or you're tiptoeing, or you're fluttering like a butterfly. When you are waiting your turn to wash your hands, you can play I Spy. I spy something that is yellow in the room, or I spy something that is a square in the room. What is your guess? So any of these would be examples of a transition. The children are going from one place to another, or one state or one condition to another, and you want to use that time more appropriately to keep the learning going. So those are my crazy examples for the day. So what if you walked into a pre-K classroom? What would be your signs that transitions in this classroom are A++? They are being done really, really well. Well, here is what you would look for. Students are given a warning that the activity is about to change. So you might hear the teacher say, we have 5 more minutes before we have to get ready for lunch, something like that. The students move in the transition from one activity to another without much trouble. There isn't chaos during the transition. There isn't an increase in challenging behavior. The transitions are smooth, in other words. The staff are prepared for the next activity. So it's not like transitions going on. The teacher really can't do a song or a game or anything because she's busy trying to find her book she's supposed to be reading. And, oh, I forgot I'm going to do this science experiment and I forgot to collect the data. No, the staff are ready. They are well prepared for whatever the activity is next. The students are engaged. So whatever is going on during the transition, even if it's cleaning up the room, they're doing it and they're engaged in it. The students are not waiting for more than 3 minutes. That would be something I would aim for. And the transitions are consistently used as a learning opportunity. So if you saw this in your pre-K classrooms, I would say that your transitions are actually very well done. I want to do a little bit of talking about daily routines because in pre-K, there just seems to be a lot of them. It seems like almost the kids are eating a lot. Usually they have breakfast and a snack, or they might have lunch and a snack. If you do all day, they might have breakfast, snack, lunch, and a snack. I mean, they eat a lot. And we want them to, because having adequate nutrition is very important in this age. Even things like cleaning up, washing the hands takes time. Having a rest time during the day. Even all of us need to go potty sometime. So how do you frame those daily routines? Often they are seen as downtime. And so often you might see the para or the teacher assistant kind of take over at that time while the teacher is quickly doing something else. And what I would like to suggest to you is that there isn't really a downtime in pre-K. And these daily routines, meals, cleaning up, resting, toileting, really should be seen as educational opportunities. Because if they are used well, just like the discussion we just had about transition, all of these can be part of the learning during the day if done well. So let's get into a schedule. We're going to first look at a half-day schedule. This particular half-day schedule is in the 2015 Texas Pre-K Guidelines. It's on page 16 if you want to look it up. And it is a suggested half-day schedule. So I thought we would start here. You will notice it has two columns. One is the amount of time that they think the activity will take, and then the other column describes the activity. You will notice there is no time frame on the very first activity. The child arrival and independent activities, there's no time there. But after that, the suggestion is to have an opening group time. And things that you might do there are perhaps the Pledge of Allegiance, or the helper chart, or the calendar, or some singing. So a little more active. And then the next thing would be the circle time. So the children would still be in group, you will notice, but one part of it was very active, and now the next part is going to be more quiet. So that's when you might do the read aloud, and you would introduce what is happening in all the learning centers for that day. You might even do some talking about the children's experiences, especially if something really cool happened the day before in school. You'll notice next, that is the largest part of the morning or afternoon. It takes an hour, and that would be your learning center time. And you'll notice that they put small group time in with this, just like when I was mentioning earlier when I was speaking with a lot of you, you do the same thing. So this time, which is a very long part of the day, a third of the day, in a half-day schedule, the children are choosing the activities in Learning Center, but there might be small group instruction going on at the same time. And then there's snack time. So those are two pretty active things. Centers are active, even though small group time might be kind of quiet. Snack time is also, it's kind of an in-between one. Yeah, the kids are active, but they're all at a table. You know, there's some control over all of it. Then the next thing is another circle time, and they are suggesting that it either center around science and math. That's an activity. Notice it's an activity, not a whatever, and it might include also a read aloud. The next part of the day is very active because they get to go outside and play. And then they suggest a circle time for the last part of the day, and then a reflection time of what happened today. We're doing a goodbye song, probably, that kind of thing, for the last 10 minutes. So if you added up all of these minutes here, it would be 170. I added them all up. There are approximately 180 minutes in a 3-hour day, of course, in a 3-hour day. If you go longer, then it could be more than 180. So that first time frame, the child arrival and independent activities would be approximately 10 minutes. But if you maybe the kids are available to come to school 15 minutes earlier, that's why that could go up to even 25 minutes. So notice here a couple of things. There are quiet and active, like I talked about. The learning center time, like we've learned, is the longest part of the day. There is a lot of movement in all of these. There is also child choice and teacher direction back and forth in this schedule. Now, do you have to do all of these things in your 3-hour half-day schedule? No, you do not have to. This is a sample schedule. So you might alter it a little bit. Let's say you decided, you know what, I really don't want the kids to have 3 circle times. I want them to have 2. Then you might take one of those 15 minutes and you might add it to your learning center small group time, so that you have enough time to get through all the children in the small group instruction time. That would be a way to make sure that all the children get the small group time, and yet it wouldn't be a huge change in the schedule. So anyway, this can be manipulated, but this is generally a sample schedule. Let's look at a full day schedule now. Now, I know this one is kind of little on the screen, so hopefully you can see it well. So this is, again, in the Texas Pre-K Guidelines book. It is also on page 16. And you'll notice I'm going to go through line by line these activities. It's set up the same way. It gives you a time frame, and then it also gives you a corresponding activity. So you'll notice here there are 2 times that they do not give a time frame. One is the very beginning, and probably for the very same reasons that the half-day schedule did. Children arrive at school at different times, so depending on what your district does during those times makes this schedule, it can be pretty short, 10 minutes, or it could be longer. And also notice that it doesn't give a time frame on rest time. Children are not little robots, and we're all going to go to sleep now. I'll count to 5. Everybody's sleeping. Yes, good. And you're all going to wake up in an hour. That just doesn't happen. That would be nice, but it doesn't happen that way. And so rest time sometimes is very fluid also. A lot of it also depends on the age of the child. Obviously, younger children, 3s, might need a longer rest time. So otherwise, let's see how this compares to the half-day schedule. So after the child arrival and independent activities, it looks like there is time for an opening again. And it would include, again, the same kinds of things: Pledge of Allegiance, helper chart, calendar, songs with movement. So this is still group time, but it's pretty active. And then is circle time. So they might stay in the same large group, but that's when a read aloud would be done. The activities for learning centers would be introduced. And there might be some talking about what the children experienced either overnight or the day before or whatever. Then notice learning center, small group time. Whoa, it went from an hour to perhaps an hour and a half. And then is snack time. Oh, I should go back with that hour to hour and a half. Notice it also includes small group time. And then there's snack time. Then another read aloud. And this time it doesn't call it circle time, which I thought was interesting. I'm not really sure why they did that, but they did. Notice outdoor time is shorter. It's only 20 minutes. And then another circle time. And then lunch for 30 minutes. And then a read aloud. Kids are getting lots of read alouds. Then rest time. And then movement, large motor, or so some perceptual motor things, some movement, music, that kind of thing. Then a circle time. And some of this is really fluid because they're not telling you exactly what they mean by it. Then learning centers again. And these learning centers then are only used for 30 minutes there. And then a 25 minutes outdoor time, so a little longer than in the morning, but if you put it together, they had 45 minutes during the day. And then again, to close, a small, short time to do reflection. If you added up all of these minutes, it would be somewhere between 290 and 320, mainly because of the hour to an hour and a half that they've listed for learning center time. If you had a 7-hour school day, I'm just using 7 hours just as an example, that would be 420 minutes. So I just told you that this schedule has up to 320 minutes. So you have another 100 minutes. So therefore, probably rest time is going to be somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours. And the child arrival would be approximately 10 or 15 minutes. Now, are there transitions on either of these schedules? No, they're not. So you know, just like I do, that if you were going from lunch to a read aloud time, that takes some movement. Lunch, the children's plates and things like that need to be put somewhere. They need to walk over to the group area. So you have to realize when you're looking at all of these time frames, transitions are not, the time for transitions, I should say, are not added in. So anyway, that would give you a sample schedule, both of half day and full day, that are in the pre-K learning guidelines. One other thing that I want to, that I consider very important, and I believe most experts in early childhood would consider this to be very important when you're looking at what is the day like for this young child. Students are given enough time to become absorbed, don't you love that word, in learning activities without constant interruptions or admonishments, to hurry. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. This is huge. I would even cut down items just to make sure that this occurs. You want your students to be absorbed in what is going on during the day. And if there's too many things, then something needs to go, because this is really important. This is where kids learn. We're going to do a little bit of time talking about how to use a daily visual schedule. I've put up an example here, and I'm just going to say I hunted for a good picture of one. You guys should maybe send me some so I have some good examples. This one, in my opinion, is lacking, and I'll show you how it's lacking in just a little while. But here's a picture that will go by. So a daily visual schedule is a very good idea in a pre-K program. It should be displayed at the child's level because that is who is using it. It should include words and pictures for every single activity. And the words should be done in the student's primary language. So that would be the first thing I would tell you why I would love to improve the daily schedule that you see on your screen, because it's all in English. And I do think that all the languages in the classroom should be on a daily schedule. And it needs pictures, and that would probably be the second thing I would change here with this schedule. You'll notice they have more cartoon-like pictures, and I actually think it is really, really, really good for a teacher, a class, to take pictures of themselves when they are at circle time, and then use that picture next to circle time. Use pictures of when the kids are really in center time and use that picture. So using real pictures, I think, has some value. A daily schedule, when used like this, should be used all the way through the year. We often find teachers use this for 1 or 2 months, but actually there are children that really use this, and they get a lot of security and comfort for being able to see, when is my mommy coming? I need to know when my mommy's coming. And they can look at the red arrow and know, oh, my mommy's not coming till the very end. I still have a lot. That does something to them, and what it does to them is good. It gives them a lot of security. The marker should be moved. You shouldn't just leave the marker. It needs to be moved every single time the transition or there is a schedule change that needs to be moved. And it needs to be adaptable. So you might need to have, let's say on a field trip day, you might have circle time, and then the next one, you take off all those other ones. You might put go to bus, and then field trip, and then maybe you do story time at the end of the day. So there needs to be a way to adapt this for days that are not typical at school. If you don't have this in your pre-K classroom, this is huge, 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 huge in helping children understand what's next and making them feel comfortable. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time. I know I have gone over a lot, but I want to give you a couple of minutes. Does anyone have any questions? And if you do, please use that question box over in the control panel and go ahead and type your question in. Do you have any questions about class schedules? Otherwise, we're going to move on to class displays. Oh, okay. I see we use a flip schedule. Is this okay? I think that's awesome. At the beginning of the year, you might, I think a flip schedule is best used after the children are very used to the schedule. The bad thing about a flip schedule is that you can't see what is happening ahead Like, what did we already do? And you can't see what's coming up. The child would have to manipulate it too much. It's not as easy as just glancing at a schedule and looking at the arrow. So I do think a flip schedule is, it's not like that's bad and horrible and whatever, but I would not use it at the beginning of the year. I think most children could transition to that after a month or two. Any other questions? Okay, good question, Iris. Obviously, teachers need time to plan. And so a question has come up, is it okay for teachers to leave the students with a para during rest time so that the teacher can get planning? And I would say, yeah, I think that's a good use of time, as long as I would preface that by saying the teachers should stay with the students until it looks like, you know, really the para doesn't need her help anymore. So most of the students are either sleeping or they are, they've got their book to read at their little cot or whatever, whatever the things that you do to help rest time. But yes, I do think that is an okay practice, mainly because the kids aren't, you know, it's not as much of a learning time. I do think the para might need the teacher's help, though, at the beginning. And the teacher kind of sets that tone. And I think that is really important, maybe and it might only take, 10 minutes. And then he or she would have a long time to do planning. Anything else? Good questions. Okay, well, if you ask them, keep typing them in. Okay, what is the recommended rest time? Well, remember back at that full day one, when I added it all up, what fit there was an hour and a half to 2 hours. And remember, that schedule did not have transitions, and we all know that transitions take time. So when you're looking at that kind of a sample schedule, I really think it's very important that you're adding in the transitions and approximately how long they take, because they take time. So, all righty, well, let's go on. If I get more questions, I'm going to answer them probably tomorrow morning, and I'll send them all to you. Okay, so go ahead and type them out, and hopefully at the end we'll have a little bit of time to go back and talk about them a little bit more. Okay, we're going to kind of move our brains now to class displays. I want to make sure we're all thinking about the same thing when we're talking about class displays. So for the purposes of our discussion, a class display is either a teacher, a student, or a commercially produced arrangement that is either within the classroom or in the hallway. Because there's usually that's a great place to display things, in the hallway. So again, sometimes they're made by a teacher. So that could be a calendar, a weather chart, a helper chart, that kind of thing. And when I say teacher, it probably should say school produced displays. So it could also be things that the school makes the teacher hang up somewhere in the room. Upcoming events or that kind of thing. Things on the parent board. And then there are student-produced class displays, and that would show you the items that the students have actually created, and they're usually tied to whatever theme or unit or project. And then lastly would just be commercially displayed things. So, when you buy a bulletin board from wherever, or you bought some posters, those are commercially produced classroom displays. So when we're talking now, I want you to think about these three different types, because that'll make a big difference in our discussion. So let's go into just some general best practices. So whatever is displayed in the classroom, this is probably the most important thing. It should be used for teaching. So if there is something hanging, stuck to the wall, on a bulletin board, hanging from the ceiling, somehow displayed, sitting on top of a learning center cabinet, if it is not used for teaching, that's not a best practice. So whatever is up in the room should be used with the children. It should be rotated to tie in with the theme or the unit. It should represent the students in the class. So if you buy a poster, say, it should have, let's say you buy a poster and your class has 90% of the children are Hispanic or Latino, the poster should match that. It should match the diversity of the children, the age of the children, even the gender of the children. The display should help students reflect on what they are learning. That's why I said to begin with, it should be used in teaching. And by looking at it, if it doesn't help the student say, oh, I remember when we did that, or, oh, I'm going to go make another one of those in art. That's best practice would say the display should assist the student in thinking about what they're learning, either what they've learned in the past or what they're going to learn. And it should be predominantly student work. So what do the experts say? Well, I hunted. There is very little that is said about classroom displays. And I kind of think that might be why there's a very wide experience about them. You can walk into one classroom and there's a million displays, and you walk in the next one and there's hardly any. So what do the experts say about displays? Well, in Texas Rising Star, it says, and I quoted this, so this is directly from them, realistic picture of children's it should say pictures, sorry about that, of children's family members, pets, and other familiar people and places, and arts or crafts created by the children are displayed at the children's eye level. So this tells me a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about the using pictures of the child's family and stuff in our next webinar, but notice realistic there. Notice arts and crafts created by the students. Notice at the child's eye level. Those are the kinds of things that I think are best practice when you're looking at displays. This comes from the Children's Learning Institute Classroom Environmental Checklist, the CEC, which I know many of you use. And again, these are quotes. They say names are visible. So the kids' names are visible in 6 or more places in the room. That's interesting. So think about that when you think about in the classroom, does the child see their name 6 or more times? And then they say there is a variety, 4 or more samples of children's work displayed throughout the room or hallway. All children are represented in at least one of the samples displayed. So that is saying when you walk into the room, there's at least 4 different displays that show children's work. Now, if you have 20 kids in your classroom, you don't have to have 20 pieces of writing and 20 pieces of art and 20 pieces of clay structures. And you see what I mean? It says here that the children are all represented in at least one of them. So it does seem to say you don't have to put all of their stuff up. You might, and that way it might not be, the room might not be as crowded in displays. The Early Childhood Environmental Rating Scale, which I have used for all of these webinars, it's a very well-known, it's called ECHRS, and it's a very well-known national rating scale for pre-kindergarten classrooms. And it says about half of the display is related to the current interest of children in the group. And one can easily tell what children's interests are or what they are discussing. Do you remember back a little ways that we were talking about when you walk into the classroom, you should be able to tell what the kids are learning about? Bingo. That's exactly what that says. They say, though, half of the displays in the classroom should be related to that directly. And then the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is probably the premier preschool association. One of their accreditation standards is at least half of the classroom displays show children's work of writing, art, crafts, or other creations. So again, they say half. So I wanted to show this to you mainly because, sometimes I'm very, please do this, 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 and this. And then sometimes, like this subject, I'm giving you very general guidance. And it's mainly because there isn't clarity on it. So I thought this was the best way to convey that to you. There's one more thing that I want you to reflect on, and that is the continuum that I think exists in classroom displays. I know that when you walk into a classroom, you've probably walked into a classroom, I have, where there's hardly any displays at all up in the room. And then you've also walked into a classroom where they have way too much stuff. There's a balance again. Some have too little, some have too much. We want the students learning from those displays. And the displays can be very supportive of what they are learning. But I will say, when there's too much in the room, I'm surprised they aren't totally distracted. Because I am. There's just too much to look at. And we wonder why the students aren't paying attention. So I'd like you to consider this. Which side of this continuum would you think your pre-K classrooms fall into? Is there too little up? Or is there too much? Are you doing good in this? Is this something that you think you've got nailed down pretty well? Are there any questions on class displays? And I know I went over that pretty quickly. I've noticed we had a question about is teaching the calendar a required standard? I don't think it is. I will probably look that up just to make sure that I'm giving you the accurate information tomorrow morning. But I think it is a method to teach rote counting. And I think it could be used as a method for children to learn about seasons, months of the year, that kind of thing. And but I don't think it is a required standard. Any questions about classroom displays? And please know, I hope that you can always email me, even call me, whatever, when, the webinar is over, or we can talk about it at our next PLC. So if you come up with, I'd like to know what everybody does about da-da-da, let me know that, and then I can send that out for our next PLC too. Okay, we're going to go on because we are almost done with our presentation now. So what are our next steps? Well, this is what I would like you to do for the activity for this unit. I would like you, again, to pick one or the other. If you can always do both, but I'd like you to either concentrate on class schedules or on class displays. And in each of those, I'd like you to think about, what is our strength here? And what is challenging? I will say, if you're going to focus on class schedules, you're going to have to collect them. So that might be, in and of itself, a good exercise for you. Go around and take a picture of all of them, or ask for a copy of all of them. And what do they all have in common? Are they the same, or do they all look really, really different? Does everyone have one? That could be a strength. What is the challenge that you see in them as compared to what we discussed today? Or you might want to pick class displays. If you do that, you're going to have to do some walking around. So I would suggest walking through some of your classrooms and just think about, is there too much or too little? And are about half of them related to the curriculum? Are they at eye level? The things that we talked about. So think about that in terms of, did you see a strength? And were you caught off guard by a challenge? And then think about what your next steps might be. And that is what I want you to share at our next PLC. So today we did the webinar. You just heard about the activities, either do schedules and or displays. At our next PLC, which will be on April 2nd, we're going to discuss what you learned. And I'm going to ask you, which one did you choose, and what did you learn? Did you find a strength? What do you think is a challenge, and how are you going to address that? And then the very next week, the week of April 8th, I'm going to get to talk with all of you individually about both of those two subjects. So that will be good. As always, we always have resources and support for you. They're getting a little long, so I actually put them on 2 slides just because I thought, oh, you guys can't even read these. Of course, you can always call me, text me, email me. And here's what we covered today: reviewing Unit 5, talking about classroom schedules and class displays, and then what we're going to go on to next. I have a great quote. I love this quote. It is not enough to be busy. The question is, what are we busy about? That might be a good way to begin a discussion with the teachers about classroom schedules. It's not enough to fill a day. It's not enough to be busy. The question is, what are we busy about? How are we using the time that we have that is so precious with those little ones? I am hoping you are going to have a great rest of the day. I'm going to stay on for just a couple of minutes. So if you have another question, go ahead and type it in. Otherwise, I'll check back. You can keep typing. It'll record them, and then I will check back with these tomorrow morning. And if more questions are asked, I will send them out. And again, this is being recorded, so I will get that recording and the PowerPoint out to you also. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.